first off, let me tell you that I'm going to talk about clinical trials and the importance of clinical trials, especially for developing new medications for treatment of these conditions. And everything I'm going to present today is publicly available. I'm not giving you, or I'm not going to disclose any information that's not fully available to the public. In fact, a lot of the slides I'm presenting, I pulled from the websites from these various companies. So, right now there's a lot of activity in the space that is the idiopathic hypersomnia and narcolepsy spaces. There's a lot of companies that are conducting clinical trials. So this is a list of the trials that are currently enrolling patients or that will soon be enrolling patients. And these include Takeda, Alkermes, Centessa, Jazz, Harmony, Eisai, and Avadel. So with that, let's talk about clinical trials. Let's see, there we go. So first off, we'll talk about phases of clinical trials. So the earliest phases are phase one. There is a preclinical program. Preclinical refers to testing of drugs in animals, and that's a whole different topic. But when clinical trials enter human testing, the earliest phase is phase one, and this is the phase of research that's used to explore ex exploratory trials to indicate or investigate how or whether a drug affects the body. And it usually involves very limited number of people, and some of these people are healthy participants. That is, they don't have the disease state. And then as the drug advances, more people are included in these trials. And again, phase one is a very early phase. And usually these trials are done to establish a safe dosage range and to identify any adverse effects. It may include patients as the testing progresses. Phase two trials are a little bit further advanced, and it's typically involving a larger group of people to determine efficacy as well as further evaluate the safety of a medication. These trials are conducted in participants with a condition or disease and will determine common short-term adverse effects and risks. So when a trial advances to phase three, this typically involves a lot of patients, oftentimes involving many sites, and these sites may be spread across the country as well as across the world. So these often involve hundreds, if not thousands, of patients. Since narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia are relatively rare, they typically involve hundreds rather than thousands of patients. But these phase three testing is the sort of the last phase prior to submission to the FDA to gain approval for a medication. Phase four clinical trials are conducted after a therapy has been approved and marketed. So generally, phase four trials are conducted to gain a new indication, approval for a new indication. For example, I'll just mention Sunosi, for example. Right now, it's indicated for treatment of sleepiness associated with sleep apnea as well as narcolepsy, but they're doing phase four studies to look at other indications, for example, treatment of excessive sleepiness associated with major depressive disorder and other things like attention deficit disorder. So that's a phase four trial. So narcolepsy, as you probably all know, is relatively uncommon. It's thought to occur in about 1 in 2,000 people. So the narcolepsy prevalence in the United States is about 200,000 patients. That's a rough estimate. It used to be said that type 1 and type 2 narcolepsy were about 50-50, but more recent data indicates that there's probably more type 2 narcoleptics as compared to type 1, probably in a 70-30 ratio, type 2 to type 1. Idiopathic hypersomnia, there's somewhere around 40,000 people that have been diagnosed with this condition. But looking at the current diagnostic criteria, this is a vast underestimate. Uh, according to current diagnostic criteria, probably 1 to 2% of the adult population qualifies as having idiopathic hypersomnia. So this is probably a vastly underdiagnosed condition. So this is another look at the prevalence of narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So, and again, this is some older data, but it's thought that probably around 240,000 people have NT1, NT2, or idiopathic hypersomnia. And you'll see that probably the number of people that are actually diagnosed is about 50% of the actual number of people that have these conditions. And the people that are treated are even far less than that. So narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia are still very underdiagnosed and undertreated. So, and again, people that are listening to me probably know all this, but I'm just going to go over briefly the differentiation between narcolepsy type 1, type 2, and idiopathic hypersomnia. First off, the narcolepsy type 1 is characterized by a number of different symptoms, including excessive sleepiness, cognitive symptoms, and cataplexy. Cataplexy is only present in type 1 narcolepsy. It's not present in type 2 narcoleptics or people with idiopathic hypersomnia. Oftentimes, people with NT1 have this REM intrusion phenomena, which causes hallucinations. When they occur toward the beginning of the night, is called hypnagogic hallucinations. They often will have sleep paralysis, which happens when people awaken out of REM sleep. They often will have very disrupted nocturnal sleep. Um, so, in this cataplexy in particular differentiates narcolepsy type 1 from type 2 as well as IH. So, people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia may have similar symptoms, and it's often difficult to differentiate people with type 2 narcolepsy versus IH. But classically, people with idiopathic hypersomnia have a lot of sleep inertia. That is, they really struggle to awaken in the morning. They'll take long, unrefreshing naps. Instead of disrupted nocturnal sleep, they'll have fairly high sleep efficiency. They rarely have sleep hallucinations or sleep paralysis, and they don't have cataplexy. They invariably have this brain fog or cognitive dysfunction during the day, and they all have excessive sleepiness. But again, there's significant overlap between NT2 and IH. And if you do repeat testing, that is overnight polysomnogram and multiple sleep latency testing, oftentimes the reliability of the testing is not very good for NT2 and IH. In fact, it's if you do repeat testing on people with IH, the likelihood that you'll get the same diagnosis upon repeat testing is somewhere around 25 or 20%. NT2, it's more like 50%. The polysomnogram and MSLT is pretty good for NT1. It's somewhere around 80 to 90% test-retest reliability. So narcolepsy is a life-altering condition. It causes a significant burden not only on the patient but also on their family. And excessive sleepiness and cataplexy may be just the tip of the iceberg. So the true burden of narcolepsy is often under-recognized and underappreciated. So narcolepsy can impact work and school, as well as daily activities, quality of life, relationships, family life, as well as there's a stigma sometimes associated with people with narcolepsy. People with narcolepsy or IH are labeled as lazy, uh, which is very unfortunate. And oftentimes this can affect mood. People with narcolepsy and IH often have mood disorders, especially depression. So this really has a markedly negative impact on both, on a personal level as well as on family. So these are the daytime symptoms, as we mentioned: excessive sleepiness, cataplexy, cognitive symptoms. And this is all referring to type 1 narcolepsy. Disrupted nighttime sleep, disturbing dreams, hallucinations, sleep paralysis. And these symptoms all have very significant impact on daily functioning, work productivity, school performance, social interactions, personal responsibilities, and recreational activities. So this is an example of the disrupted nocturnal sleep that we see with narcolepsy, in particular narcolepsy type 1. So this is normal sleep on the left. You'll see that, most people require somewhere around 7 to 8 hours of sleep to function optimally. Look at the people with narcolepsy. Look how disrupted their sleep is. It's extremely fragmented. And they'll have these intermittent bouts of sleepiness throughout the day. So both the nocturnal sleep is disrupted as well as daytime wakefulness. So this is very characteristic of type 1 narcolepsy. So this is the journey that people with narcolepsy often undergo from onset of symptoms to time of diagnosis as well as treatment. So patients may present to their primary care physicians who often fail to recognize their symptoms or dismiss their symptoms or label their symptoms as something other than narcolepsy. And oftentimes people will use terms like tiredness or fatigue, and these terms really are different than sleepiness. So and we really try to emphasize the importance of differentiating sleepiness versus fatigue. So sleepiness refers to the propensity to fall asleep, whereas fatigue refers to mental or physical weariness associated with physical or mental activity. So these are very different symptoms, sleepiness and fatigue, but oftentimes people with excessive sleepiness will use the words tired or fatigued, which may lead physicians down a different path. So oftentimes patients with narcolepsy or IH are mislabeled with the diagnoses of depression, ADHD, anxiety, and they're often treated with antidepressant medication. And these symptoms may overlap. The symptoms of sleepiness with narcolepsy may overlap with concomitant conditions such as depression or anxiety. And the treatment may mask some of the symptoms. For example, some of the antidepressants actually are fairly effective at suppressing cataplexy and may actually promote some degree of wakefulness. So there's often significant wait times for sleep testing due to the limitations of infrastructure and technology and not good availability of sleep centers or sleep physicians. And unfortunately, a lot of times when people see a sleep physician and they undergo testing, they're still misdiagnosed. So a lot of the sleep clinics are run by pulmonologists, and their main focus is sleep apnea. And not every sleep specialist is focused or has much experience in treating narcolepsy. So uh, people that think they may have narcolepsy are well advised to seek out centers that have some degree of expertise in treating people with the central disorders of hypersomnia. And then finally, after a diagnosis is made, people may undergo trial and error with different medications, leading to polypharmacy and, taking multiple different medications. And sometimes the suboptimal treatment experience leads to discontinuation and treatment burnouts. So, and furthermore, sometimes the goals of the patients are not aligned with the treatment of uh, uh, recommended by physicians. So there's a limited capacity for treatment, follow-ups, and monitoring, and that imposes a significantly increased burden on patients and impacts quality of life. So this is the journey, unfortunately, that a lot of people with narcolepsy and people with IH undergo, and oftentimes the average diagnosis delay is 10 to 15 years. So again, here's a sort of a summary, the symptom dismissal at the beginning, diagnostic delays, and then, overall less than 50% of people with narcolepsy are diagnosed with this condition. Discontinuation rate of medications is relatively high. Add-on polypharmacy is very common. Residual symptoms can occur despite people taking several medications. And only about 75% of people that have been diagnosed with narcolepsy have actually been treated with medication. And again, there's a very low disease awareness, undervalued disease burden, and low treatment expectations. All of these things can impact the care of people with narcolepsy. So these are the key symptoms: excessive sleepiness, cataplexy, disrupted nocturnal sleep, and oxybate therapy at this point still remains probably the most effective medication to treat all these three symptoms of narcolepsy. And only about 77% of people with narcolepsy are actually treated with medication, which is hard to believe. So it's again, the people with narcolepsy are very uh, undertreated as well as underdiagnosed. So this gives you some idea of what with narcolepsy are up against. There's about 9,000 healthcare providers that treat people with narcolepsy in this country. Oxybate therapy, that includes Xyrem, Xywav, and Lumryz, are the most effective treatments for all the symptoms of narcolepsy. Yet, despite the fact that there are probably 200,000 people with narcolepsy in this country, and only about 17,000 people are receiving oxybate therapy. And there's approximately 4,000 healthcare providers prescribing oxybate therapy. 5,000 healthcare providers who treat narcolepsy do not prescribe oxybate therapy. So this gives you some idea that a lot of docs are not comfortable prescribing oxybate because there are some hurdles that we have to jump through in order to prescribe this. So that leads to under treatment of a lot of people with narcolepsy, unfortunately. So let's talk about the pathophysiology of narcolepsy. Narcolepsy type 1 is a unique pathophysiology, meaning that we know exactly what causes narcolepsy type 1, and that's a deficiency of orexin in the brain. So orexin is the master neurochemical that interacts with other neurochemicals that helps us stay awake during the day. People with narcolepsy type 1 have an absence of the neurons in the brain that produce orexin. So there's probably about 50 to 80,000 neurons in our brain that produce this chemical called orexin. And to give you some context, the average human brain contains about 60 billion neurons. So when you consider that around 60,000 neurons produce orexin, that's a minuscule number compared with the total number of neurons in our brain. So, and we think that probably this destruction of these neurons that produce orexin is related to an autoimmune mechanism that's often triggered by some infections, such as influenza or other viral infections, or sometimes actually vaccines can trigger this. But it's or bacterial infections such as streptococcal infections. So the autoimmune system may be revved up by an infection, and the autoimmune system attacks these neurons in the brain in people that are susceptible to this. So people with narcolepsy have a specific genetic marker called the HLA DQB10602. This is a marker this can be revealed in a blood test, and this renders people with narcolepsy type 1 susceptible to destruction of these neurons in the brain. So having said that, what these drug companies are developing is what's called orexin agonists. So the orexin agonists replace the effect of orexin in the brain, thereby really reducing or eliminating all the symptoms of narcolepsy. So this is really a very exciting time to be involved in this narcolepsy research because all these different companies are very interested in developing these orexin receptors. By the way, orexin antagonists are also available, and there's several of them currently on the market, and these medicines are indicated for treatment of insomnia. So this is just an overview of, again, orexin is produced in the part of the brain called the hypothalamus, and it interacts with a lot of other nuclei in the brain that produce these other chemicals. So these are the other chemicals involved in promoting wakefulness that allow us to stay awake during the day. So these include acetylcholine, histamine, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. So all of these neurochemicals are important to help us maintain wakefulness. But orexin is sort of the key signaling uh, chemical in our brain that triggers the release of all these other wake-promoting medications or uh, substances, rather. So the orexin 2 agonist pathway has a potential for treating not only narcolepsy, but companies are also going to be eventually looking at these orexin agonists for a lot of other indications, including attention deficit disorder, fatigue associated with multiple sclerosis, the sleepiness associated with Parkinson's disease, and also various psychiatric indications such as bipolar disorder, cognitive impairment associated with schizophrenia, maybe perhaps treatment of major depressive disorder and seasonal affective disorder, as well as a lot of other indications. By the way, there is also an orexin 1 receptor that seems to be more related to metabolism. But the orexin 2 receptor is the main receptor in the brain that regulates sleep and wakefulness. So let's talk about narcolepsy studies, and again, narcolepsy as well as IH. So idiopathic hypersomnia is often studied in association with narcolepsy. So usually these studies involve patients, adult patients 18 to 70. There are other pediatric trials that are ongoing, but what I'm going to focus on today is just the adult trials. So these trials typically recruit adults age 18 to 70 with narcolepsy type 1 or type 2. And usually what they're looking for, these companies are people with excessive sleepiness and or cataplexy. So usually the people with that have to meet the following criteria, that is a fairly regular or daily pattern of excessive daytime sleepiness, having a diagnosis of NT1 or NT2, having a body mass index somewhere between 18 or 35. In other words, they can't be, extremely thin or morbidly obese, and not have symptoms of narcolepsy secondary to some other medical condition like a tumor or a stroke, and not have untreated or uncontrolled sleep apnea or any other sleep-related problem that would interfere with the testing. And there are oftentimes other eligibility requirements that are specific to these various studies. So orexin agonists, as we mentioned, orexin is the master neurochemical in the brain that helps regulate sleep and wake cycle. And these investigational studies being researched are orexin 2 receptor agonists that may improve symptoms of sleep disorders, especially excessive sleepiness in adults with NT1 or NT2. And they also improve cataplexy in people with NT1. The orexin agonists are tablets. They're usually administered once or twice daily. During these studies, participants will be randomly assigned to either study drug or placebo. Placebo is a tablet that contains no active medication. And why is this done? So why do we always compare the drug to placebo? Well, it turns out that placebo is remarkably effective for treatment of a lot of different things. So there's about 30% of people that respond well if given a placebo, so they feel better. And there is a physiologic reason for this. If you take a pill and you think it's going to help you, then that pill actually releases dopamine in the brain, and people perceive a benefit from taking placebos. So placebo uh, helps almost everything. It helps, if you do trials for depression or restless leg syndrome or anxiety or pain, placebo invariably helps to some degree, about 30% of people that take placebo. So what we want to do is look at the difference between active medication and placebo. So that's what the FDA looks at when they approve a drug. They want to make sure that the active medication provides substantial benefit as compared to placebo. So in most of these studies, there's about a 25 to 33% chance that subjects during the course of study may receive placebo. And depending on the study design, subjects may receive placebo during a portion of or throughout the study duration. So These early phase narcolepsy studies usually are relatively short. Sometimes they're 2 to 3 months. They may last up to 21 weeks in some cases. There's a screening period that may last up to 6 weeks. Patients are evaluated to see if they are eligible to join one of these studies. And then during this period, people have to wash out of their medications, meaning they have to stop taking their standard narcolepsy medication for at least usually for a couple weeks or more, depending on the type of medicine. And then there's usually a mandatory overnight stay in the research facility. And during this period, patients or participants may undergo a sleep study as well as a maintenance of wakefulness test. Now, many of you know what a maintenance or a MSLT is. That's a multiple sleep latency test. The maintenance of wakefulness test is opposite. What we do is have people uh, sit in a semi-recumbent position in a dark, quiet room and tell them to try to stay awake. So, even people that are fully awake sometimes have trouble staying awake in that situation. But we do this over a period of 4 to 5 nap opportunities. So we wake people up in the morning, feed them breakfast, and then we have them go into this dark, quiet room and without any stimulation, no phones, no tablets, nothing. So, uh, people with narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia have great difficulty maintaining wakefulness in this sort of situation. So we do this over 4 to 5 nap opportunities over the course of the day. So every 2 hours we conduct another nap opportunity to see if people are able to stay awake. So, and I'll present you some data that looks at this multiple sleep latency or maintenance of wakefulness test. So and then following the screening period, there's a treatment period. The treatment period usually lasts around 6 to 8 weeks. Participants are randomized to receive one or several doses of study medication or placebo, again, taken once or twice daily. And again, there's usually sleep studies as well as maintenance of wakefulness testing performed during this treatment period. Then oftentimes there's an open label extension. This is an optional period which may last for 1 to several months. People that participate in the treatment period will have the opportunity to enroll in the open label extension period, but this extension period is optional, so people can discontinue the study after the treatment period if they so wish. But the open label extension period is usually to evaluate the ongoing safety and efficacy of the drug. And finally, when people finally conclude the study, there's usually safety follow-up visits where the study team may check on the participant health during this period. Sometimes this just involves phone calls, or in some cases it involves visits to the research facility. So during these research testing, oftentimes vital signs are measured, EKGs, physical exam, blood and urine samples are collected. There's body weight measurements, and then there's various questionnaires about quality of life and narcolepsy symptoms. So now let's get into the specific uh, companies and specific studies that are ongoing. So Takeda looks like they're going to have the first orexin agonist on the market. I think most people agree that Takeda seems to be on the forefront of developing their orexin agonists, and they're the furthest along with the testing. So, in fact, they're the only company right now that's doing phase 3 testing in people with narcolepsy type 1. So, Takeda has two different molecules. One is called TAK-861, and this is the formulation that's going to be used for people with type 1 narcolepsy. They also have a separate molecule, an orexin agonist, called TAK-360, and this is going to be evaluated in people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So they're already pretty far along with their phase 2 or phase 3 program. They've concluded a phase 1 and phase 2 programs. So TAK-861 is called oveporexton. They've given it a name. So this is an example of how they're conducting their phase 3 study. There's various doses that are being studied. They're looking at twice daily versus a once daily formulation compared to placebo, and then there's a long-term extension. The key efficacy points are maintenance of wakefulness testing, as we mentioned. Then there's the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. This is a subjective scale that people enroll, and this is pretty much standard in most of the narcolepsy studies. And to give you some context, this scale is from 0 to 24, 0 being not sleepy at all, and 24 being extremely sleepy. So a score of 10 or greater is considered excessively sleepy. Most people with narcolepsy have scores somewhere around 16 to 18 or even higher. Um, so in normal people, if you look at normal people in the population, if you give them this test, the average score is around 5. So this gives you some context. And then the weekly cataplexy rate, as well as narcolepsy severity scale, these are captured in diaries usually. And it turns out that 95% of the people that completed the placebo-controlled study enrolled in long-term extension studies. So most people really like these orexin agonists, most of the participants. So if you look at the orexin during the course of a 24-hour period, it turns out that orexin levels in our brain are very low at night, and this allows people to sleep. But then when we awaken in the morning, we have a gradual increase in orexin throughout the day, peaking shortly before we go to bed, and then it really dissipates dramatically when we're asleep. So there's a threefold difference between the peak in the evening before we go to bed and when we're actually asleep. So what these medications try to replicate is this natural fluctuation in the orexin level during the course of a 24-hour period. So this is very important to try to achieve this or mimic what's happening throughout the 24-hour cycle with these medications. So this is why we do a lot of blood testing to try to figure out, what are the orexin levels and what's going to be the appropriate dose for people. So this is an example of the maintenance of wakefulness testing that's done. So you'll see at baseline, people are, without any medication, they're extremely sleepy. So you put them in this dark, quiet room and tell them to try to stay awake, and they're only able to stay awake for, you know, 5, 6 minutes or less. So then after they're given the medication, the orexin agonist, and again, this is for people with type 1 narcolepsy, you'll see this dramatic increase in their ability to stay awake. So we consider 20 minutes. So if people are able to stay awake for 20 minutes or more during these nap opportunities, then that's considered normal. And you can see that the Takeda's orexin agonist really produced normality in both at week 8 and week 34. So this gives you an idea as to how effective these orexin agonists are. So in these NT1 patients over a course of 6 months maintained this improved wakefulness. So this illustrates that there's no tolerance or no decrease in the efficacy of the drug over time. So here's the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, and as you know, as I mentioned, 10 or higher is considered excessively sleepy. And people with narcolepsy type 1 that took the orexin agonist maintained normal degree of wakefulness throughout the day, and this was sustained over the course of 6 months. So again, this illustrates the dramatic improvement with the orexin agonist. Here's weekly cataplexy rates. Again, you'll see a dramatic reduction in weekly cataplexy rates with Takeda's orexin agonist. And here's illustrating nights per week with disturbing dreams, nights per week with hallucinations. So both these disturbing dreams and hallucinations were dramatically reduced relative to placebo on orexin agonist. And this is the narcolepsy severity scale. This is a self-administered 15-item scale, but it evaluates severity, frequency, and impact of 5 narcolepsy symptoms. specifically sleepiness, cataplexy, sleep paralysis, hallucinations, and disrupted nocturnal sleep. And you can see that across all these symptoms, the Takeda's orexin agonist had a dramatic effect on reducing all these symptoms associated with narcolepsy. So oveporexton was well tolerated by people with type 1 narcolepsy with no serious treatment-related adverse effects or discontinuation. Most of the adverse effects seen were insomnia, urinary urgency, and excessive secretion of saliva. And most of these adverse effects occurred within the first 1 to 2 weeks of treatments. There were no cases of hepatotoxicity or visual disturbances, and 90% of people that participated in the trial enrolled in the optional long-term extension study. So again, here's the illustration of what they're currently doing with type 1 narcolepsy. These trials. There's 2 doses of this oveporexton relative to placebo, and then there's a second arm looking at 1 dose relative to placebo. So they expect to have a readout from their phase 3 trials sometime in the latter part of this year. So in summary, for Takeda, they've got a very accelerated pathway for their type 1 program, type 1 narcolepsy program. And we expect some data latter part of this year. They're also looking at IH and narcolepsy type 2, and they're a little further behind with this program, and they've got a separate molecule called TAC360, but they've initiated these trials, and these trials probably will be conducted throughout the course of this year. So let's move on to Centessa. Centessa is also a company that's developing a orexin agonist. Their orexin agonist is called ORX750. So they're currently conducting trials for type 1 narcolepsy, type 2 narcolepsy, as well as IH. And they've finished preclinical in phase 1, and now they're into phase 2. And all of their trials are ongoing, and we're enrolling for all these conditions, NT1, NT2, as well as IH. So they had a phase 1 study where they looked at sleep-deprived, healthy, normal volunteers, and they captured maintenance of wakefulness testing data, as well as what's called the Karolonsky sleepiness scale, which is a scale that's indicates how sleepy people are during the course of the day. And thus far, what they've seen in these healthy, normal, sleep-deprived people, where there are no significant adverse side effects, there was a linear PK profile, meaning that that supports a once-daily oral administration of the drug, and it did show some good efficacy in these sleep-deprived individuals. So, for example, at various doses, you'll see that the mean sleep latency on the maintenance of the maintenance of wakefulness testing was dramatically improved relative to placebo in these very sleepy normal subjects. So they had good efficacy at all of the doses tested. And you also see a dose response relationship. So the higher the dose, the more effective the medication. So they've got a phase 2A program underway right now for both types of narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. And again, they're evaluating the maintenance of wakefulness test as well as the Epworth Sleepiness Scale and weekly cataplexy. And these, they'll have a lot of other questionnaires evaluating cognition, attention, and memory as well as general health. So this is a design. I'm just showing you the type 1 I'm going to show you the type 1 narcolepsy design, but all of these designs are similar in that they have placebo versus the active medication. And for every 2 weeks, people are switched from active medication to placebo. So there will be people that are participating in the trial will be guaranteed at least some exposure to the active medication, but they will also probably be exposed to placebo as well. And these various doses are being evaluated. So here's this randomized double-blind placebo-control crossover study in patients with type 1 narcolepsy, but the similar design is for people with type 2 narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. Again, 2-week exposure to active drug or placebo, and then there's a crossover period, and then finally the latter part of the study, people will be guaranteed to have exposure to the medication. So they're rapidly progressing with their phase 2A study. Uh, the data should be expected the latter part of this year. So they've got a very robust program that looks very promising. So there's another company called Alchemies that's also developing an orexin 2 agonist, and they're also evaluating this medication in type 1 narcoleptics, type 2 narcoleptics, as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. So they've got a highly potent selective orexin agonist, and their data shows that it's orally bioavailable, meaning it's well absorbed in the stomach. It can be administered once daily, and it mimics the natural sleep-wake cycle, which is important. So this is their study design. So again, this is various doses that are being tested. And again, this is their phase 1 data. This is a proof of concept, meaning they're testing it to see if the drug actually works, and also to look at safety and tolerability. So during their phase 1 data or testing, there were minimal treatment-related adverse effects, and these were mild in severity and typically transient. There were no serious treatment-related adverse effects leading to discontinuation, and the treatment-related side effects reported were insomnia, poikiluria, which means frequent urination, excessive salivation, decreased appetite, dizziness, and nausea. And you can see similar side effect profile in the people with type 2 narcolepsy as well as idiopathic hypersomnia. There were no meaningful changes in laboratory parameters and no safety signals in vital signs or EKGs. So this is an illustration of the various dosing compared to placebo and compared to baseline. And you'll see there's a dose response so that the higher the dose of the medication, that people had a more greater response on the maintenance of wakefulness test. And again, we see 20 minutes is normal, and these people were able to maintain wakefulness very well, especially at the higher doses. So they've got very good data, very promising data for their orexin 2 agonists. And again, here's the phase 2 program, and they're actively enrolling for this as I speak. So there's various doses that are being studied relative to placebo. Again, there's an initial screening period, a washout period, the double-blind treatment phase, and then an open label extension and a safety follow-up. So this is the sort of the standard approach to evaluate these medications. So their studies are called the Vibrance studies, Vibrance 1, 2, and 3 for type 1, 2 narcolepsy and IH. And yeah, these studies are ongoing and currently enrolling. So this is what they anticipate. They anticipate that they'll have data for their phase 2 program in the latter part of this year. So let's move on to Harmony. So Harmony, as many of you know, has a product called Wakix. Wakix pitolisant is the generic name for that. Wakix is a unique product, and it increases histamine in the brain. Histamine is one of the major wake-promoting chemicals in our brain, and Wakix is the only product that actually increases histamine. It's a once daily dose. It's indicated for the treatment of excessive sleepiness and/or cataplexy in narcolepsy. And the other unique thing about this drug is it's non-scheduled, meaning that it's much easier to prescribe for physicians. So that has made it a very attractive option. So it's there's no abuse liability. It's not habit forming, or there's no addictive potential. So it makes it easier to prescribe, and it's attractive drug. It can be used as a monotherapy or it can be used as an add-on therapy to other treatments because of its unique mechanism of action. So Harmony is developing a high dose formulation. Currently, the highest dose that we can prescribe is 35.6 milligrams. It comes in 17.8 milligram tablets, so we can prescribe 2 tablets, typically administered once a day in the morning, and that's the highest dose that's currently available. Well, Harmony's looking at a higher dose because they think there's better efficacy. Some of their data shows that there's the higher dose allows people to maintain wakefulness better throughout the day as compared to the currently available dose. So 7 to 8 out of 10 patients continue to experience excessive daytime sleepiness despite being on treatment. So they're hoping that the high dose is going to alleviate that to a substantial degree. So this is their program for the high dose pitolisant. So they're going to be looking at conducting studies really beginning this year, phase 3 studies, and then they'll have a submission to the FDA in 2027 and hopefully approval thereafter. So the high dose looks good. Thus far, what they've seen, it doses up to 180 milligrams. There's no significant or serious adverse effects noted, no new safety or tolerability issues. And they're going to be presenting some of their data for the higher dose formulation in upcoming meetings. So that's exciting for people with narcolepsy and IH that this higher dose will be available probably in the next couple years. So in addition, Harmony also has a orexin agonist. So their orexin agonist currently goes by the label BP 1.15205, and it looks like they've got a very potent orexin 2 agonist, and they're going to be developing that as well. So they'll probably be conducting their studies beginning latter part of this year or early next year. And so they're hoping that they can use their orexin agonist perhaps in addition to the high dose pitolisant to really benefit people that have severe excessive sleepiness. So Jazz Pharmaceuticals is also developing an orexin agonist. They're a little bit further behind some of the other companies, but they're currently conducting a phase 1 study looking at people with type 1 narcolepsy. So this is the name of the study, JZP 441-105. We're currently enrolling people in this study, and this is to evaluate the efficacy, safety, tolerability, and the pharmacokinetics of their medication. So they're starting their program, and I expect this will be ongoing over the next couple of years. Eisai also has an orexin agonist. They conducted a phase 1 study. This is no longer enrolling, and I have not yet seen their data, but I participated in the study. It looks like their data is going to be promising, but again, we haven't seen any published results thus far. So, and I'm not quite sure what they're going to be doing with their orexin agonist program. And last but not least is Avidel. Avidel has as you know, a once nightly oxybate product. So the currently available oxybate products, and by oxybate I mean gamma hydroxybutyrate, and there's 3 available products right now: Xyrem, Xywav, and Lumryz. So the difference being that Xyrem has it's a twice nightly preparation that has a relatively high sodium content. I think it's about 1.6 grams of sodium for the highest dose of 9 grams nightly. So Lumryz and Xywav is the low sodium formulation. So Xywav has 92% less sodium as compared to Xyrem, which makes it attractive for people that have comorbidities such as high blood pressure or heart failure or kidney problems. So it's just a better option, especially for those patients. So Lumryz is a once nightly preparation. It does have the same amount of sodium as compared to Xyrem. That is about 1.6 grams of sodium for the highest dose. But it offers advantages in the convenience of the once nightly formulation, and that's a nice option for a lot of patients. So currently, the only medication approved for idiopathic hypersomnia is Xywav. That's the only one that's currently approved. So uh, Xyrem and Xywav both have approval for excessive sleepiness as well as treatment of cataplexy in people with narcolepsy. Uh, Avadel's product, Lumryz, has that indication, that is excessive sleepiness and cataplexy, but they're also going after the idiopathic hypersomnia indication. So they're currently enrolling patients in their study, their phase 3 trial called Revitalize, and their target is 150 patients participating in a 14-week study period. So we're currently enrolling with this. It's if you all are interested in this study, you can contact my site, which is Intrepid Research in Cincinnati. So this is their an overview of their sleep pipeline. So their product was approved in May of 2023 and launched in June 2023. And they also have the pediatric indication, and they're going after this idiopathic hypersomnia indication with their Revitalize phase 3 trial. And they're also down the road, they're also developing a low or no sodium oxybate formulation that's extended release once nightly. So that's an overview of what Avidel's got going on. So a summary of clinical trials. So what are the benefits? There's compensation for time and travel, including things like travel to grocery stores or appointments or whatever. And then there's obviously the potential to receive a novel treatment for narcolepsy, and this is exciting for a lot of people with narcolepsy. People have been waiting a long time for these orexin agonists. This is, I view people with type 1 narcolepsy as being similar to type 1 diabetics, and that insulin is the cure or the best treatment for people with type 1 diabetes because that's what their body is missing. Well, similarly, with type 1 narcolepsy, people are missing orexin, and giving them an orexin agonist is very exciting because it's very effective at treating the symptoms of narcolepsy, and it has major advantages over the currently available medical treatments. And then there's a potential to receive study medication for an extended period of time if an open label extension study is offered. And then throughout the course of the trial, there's very careful medical evaluation and testing. So people receive much more medical attention and evaluation during the course of a clinical trial as compared to standard medical practice. And this is important for monitoring the safety of the drug, but also it ensures that study participants will have a good result throughout the duration of the study. The disadvantages of participating in a clinical trial are a requirement to wash off medications for narcolepsy and cataplexy during the course of the study. So, and this is a big deal. I mean, it's very difficult for people to come off their medications for narcolepsy and cataplexy. So these studies aren't for everybody. Not everybody is able to wash off their medications. But for those people that are able to, then there's obviously significant advantage to participating. There is a possibility of placebo for at least a portion of the trial. And these various trials are very different, but usually everybody ends up having at least some exposure to placebo, and that's maybe difficult to tolerate. But that's an important part of being in the trials is having this placebo arm. And then there's obviously the time commitment for study visits and doing these sleep studies. There are periods of confinement, usually for the overnight sleep study and the maintenance of wakefulness testing. But the periods of confinement are not for an extended period of time. So with that, why don't we conclude and let me open up to any questions. Yeah. Where do you think orexin agonists replacement therapy will be if they get approved. So I think that the orexin agonists will replace most of the other wake-promoting medications. So what are the wake-promoting medications or stimulants? There's classically the stimulants include things like methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, and then the amphetamine salts, which includes Adderall, Vyvanse, and a lot of other amphetamine preparations. And then the wake-promoting agents currently available in the U.S. include modafinil, which is Provigil, armodafinil, which is Nuvigil, and there's solriamfetol, which is Sunosi, and of course Wakix, which is pitolisant. So all these things have different mechanisms of action. And I think the orexin agonists will probably replace these other stimulants or wake promoting medications. Plus, they will effectively treat cataplexy in those people with type 1 narcolepsy. By the way, it looks like people with type 1 narcolepsy are very sensitive to the orexin agonists, and usually people with type 2 narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia will require doses that are 3 times higher than the type 1 narcoleptics. So, and that's because people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia have normal orexin levels in their brain. So yeah, they will require higher dosing, and the companies are trying to figure out the dosing for these various conditions. Second question, will the orexin agonists correct the disrupted nighttime sleep? Well, that is a very very important question, and the answer is we don't quite know. We think that they might have a beneficial effect on disrupted nocturnal sleep, but we don't know. I've talked to other researchers about this. I talked to Emmanuel Mignot about this not long ago. It's probable that people may have to take an orexin agonist during the day and still have to take something at night to address their disrupted nocturnal sleep, such as oxybate therapy. But we just don't know that right now. So hopefully, as more people are exposed to the orexin agonist, we'll have a better answer to that question. And then if you are a patient in a clinical trial and the medicine is working well for you, how long can you stay on it? Can you stay on it until it comes to market? Well, yeah, it turns out that after the phase 1 and phase 2 studies, the open label extension periods are not that long usually. When you get to phase 3, then oftentimes people do have the option of staying on medication long term, in some cases up until it's actually approved. So, yeah, these phase 3 studies will have long-term open label extensions, but the phase 2 studies, typically the open label extension is much shorter. So, but usually there is an opportunity to stay on it for some period of time. If people with type 2 narcolepsy have normal levels of orexin, what is the mechanism of the new drugs being studied for people with N2? Well, type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia are a spectrum, I believe that, so there's definitely overlap between these conditions, and we don't know the pathophysiology of what causes sleepiness in people with type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. It may be a decrease in some other neurochemicals in the brain, norepinephrine, histamine, uh, serotonin, dopamine, but the answer is we don't know, and all the studies that have been done thus far have not demonstrated a specific chemical abnormality that would cause sleepiness in these populations of people. But it turns out that the orexin agonists do promote wakefulness in people with these conditions, type 2 narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. And interestingly, oxybate therapy also is dramatically effective in improving wakefulness in people with these conditions. And we know that oxybate therapy really promotes or consolidates sleep during the night. It also increases dopamine levels during the day. So, but we really do not understand the reason why people with type 2 narcolepsy and IH have excessive sleepiness. So this is still an unanswered question, and we don't know. It looks promising. These orexin agonists look very promising for treatment of these conditions. But as we go down the road, we'll have a lot more data to look at. And I still think that probably people with these conditions may need to take several medications. I sort of look at like these conditions are similar to treatment of hypertension. People with hypertension often need to take 2 or 3 different medications to optimally control their blood pressure. And similarly, with people with type 2 narcolepsy and IH, may need to take several different medicines with different mechanisms of action to allow them to remain fully awake and alert through the day.